The Irish censuses are best known as a name-rich source, used by genealogists and family historians to track ancestors in the early 20th century. But beyond the familiar household returns, there are parts that can tell us a lot about the properties they lived in. Regular censuses took place across Ireland from the early 19th century, but 1901 and 1911 are the only surviving complete censuses of Ireland which are currently accessible to the public. The records are available through most of the major genealogy websites, but are also freely accessible on the dedicated National Archives of Ireland website, census.nationalarchives.ie. There are several ways to search the census. The basic search allows you to search by name and place. There's no address search, as properties weren't generally recorded with addresses as we would recognise them today. In rural and semi-rural areas, the censuses were taken by townland, the smallest territorial division of land across Ireland. In urban areas, properties were recorded by street, but the number on the census form, shown here on the transcription page and in the upper right corner of the household return, did not always correspond with a street number, but reflects the order they were enumerated. If you want to search for a place, there are 3 relevant boxes on the search form: the drop-down list of counties, the street or townland, and the DED or district electoral division. You don't need to know all these, but the DED can be useful for separating out townlands with similar names. Some of the place name spellings can be tricky as well, so it can be worth using wildcards if the place you want doesn't turn up on your first search. There's also a box for more search options and a browse option, where you can pick a census and then drill down through county, DED and townland or street to find a list of properties. Whichever way you search, you'll come to a household transcription page, which contains all the links to the documents you need. To show you what's available, I'm going to be using examples from my 2 one-place studies. The first, Censuses, was a large house in County Down. When it was built in 1863, the area was still quite rural, but during the lifetime of the house, it became increasingly developed, becoming part of the expanding city of Belfast. In the early 20th century, Censuses was located on a partially developed suburban street, Sydenham Avenue, which was characterised by large houses and smaller houses for staff. The second place is Kirglasson, which is a small rural and predominantly agricultural settlement near Stewartstown in County Tyrone. As well as the familiar household return, more formally titled Form A, which was filled in by someone in the household, there were several other forms which were completed by the enumerator. 2 of these forms are particularly relevant for house history. The first of these is Form B1, the House and Building Return. This was divided into 2 parts: houses and families. The houses section was further divided into general information and the particulars of inhabited houses. In the general section, the first column is the number of the house or building, as recorded in the top right corner of the household return. The second column recorded whether the house was already built or in the process of being built. The third column asked the enumerator to state what type of building it was, giving as specific examples private dwelling, public building, school, manufactory, hotel, public house, lodging house, or shop. In the return from Kirglasson, you can see that most of the buildings were private houses, but one of the houses had a grocery shop attached. Kirglasson Creamery is also recorded separately. The fourth column asked how many outbuildings there were, and this information was recorded on a separate form, which we'll come to later. The final column in this section recorded whether or not the building was inhabited. The next section, on the particulars of inhabited houses, looked at several specific details of the buildings. The first column is headed Walls. If the building's walls were constructed of stone, brick or concrete, the enumerator was to enter the number 1 in this column. If they were made from mud, wood, or another perishable material, he was to enter the figure 0. There was a similar approach in the next column for roofing materials. If the roof was made of slate, iron, or tile, the enumerator entered a 1. If it had been constructed from thatch, wood, or other perishable material, he entered a 0. The third column quantified how many rooms were in the house. If there was just one room, the enumerator entered the number 1. For 2, 3, or 4 rooms, he entered the number 2. For 5 or 6 rooms, the number 3, and so on, until houses with 13 or more rooms were recorded with the number 6. In the fourth column, the enumerator was asked to state the exact number of windows, specifically the ones in the front of the house. The numbers in these 4 columns then effectively became scores, which were added together in the next column. In the final column, these totals were translated into classes of housing. A score of 1 or 2, which would have meant a one-room house with a window, or a house with a few rooms but no windows, built only out of perishable materials, was classed as 4th class. A house scoring 3, 4, or 5 was 3rd class. A house scoring between 6 and 11 was 2nd class, and a house scoring 12 or more was considered 1st class. In the example from Craglasson, the majority of the houses came out as 2nd class, with 2 1st class and 2 3rd. All the houses had walls built from permanent materials, but roofs were more likely to be made from perishable ones. In contrast, in the example from Sydenham Avenue, the houses were fairly evenly split between 1st and 2nd class. All the 2nd class houses here were workers' accommodation belonging to the bigger houses. The 2 smallest may even have been part of the stable range at Kinneder, rather than standalone dwellings. Reflecting the suburban setting and nature of the buildings, all the houses were built entirely from permanent materials. In the final section, headed Families, etc., there are 2 columns which will be of particular interest to house historians. One recording the number of families in each house, and another giving the number of rooms which were occupied by each family. The second form we'll be looking at is Form B2, the return of out offices and farmsteadings, that is, the outside buildings associated with the house. Not all outbuildings were included. The form makes clear that it was only to be used for buildings intended for domestic or agricultural purposes. 3 classes of buildings in particular were not to be included: those used for sanitary accommodation, those used for horticultural purposes, and those used for pleasure, such as summer houses and tea houses. The outbuildings that were recorded were grouped broadly into 3 types. The first included stables, coach houses, and harness rooms. The second was concerned with livestock and recorded the number of cow houses, calf houses, dairies, piggeries, fowl houses, boiling houses, which were used for the preparation of animal feed, and barns. The third group was the domestic or industrial outbuildings, such as the turf house, potato houses, workshops, sheds, stores, forges, and laundries. There was additional space left on the form for the enumerator to record any other buildings which hadn't been specifically included. Looking at the form from rural Craglasson, all but one of the inhabited properties had outbuildings. Of those that did, almost all had fowl houses, and most had barns. Only the largest house, Craglasson House or the American House, had a coach house and harness room. In contrast, in Sydenham Avenue, only the large first-class houses had outbuildings. All of them had stables and most had a coach house or harness room. There were fewer buildings for livestock, which these same houses would have had a generation or so earlier. Canada at one stage had had cows, and presumably some sort of dairy, but by 1911 there was just a fowl house, a potato house, and a laundry. The information contained on both these forms can transform your understanding of a building and its surroundings, and should also help give you a feel for the wider neighbourhood and the community around. I hope you have lots of exciting discoveries ahead of you.